What's going on, guys? My name is Brian and welcome back to Vontech. Today is going to be the first video in our how to build a gaming PC series. So there'll be a total of 5 different videos in this series, and our hope is that by the end of the 5 videos you guys will have more than enough information and enough confidence so that you guys can go ahead and put together your first PC. If you're interested in a breakdown of all of those videos, be sure to check out the description box below because I'll be leaving all that information down there. Anyways, let's roll the intro so we can talk about today's topic. What are the main components of a PC and what do I need to know about them? So today we're going to take a look at the 9 main parts of a PC build. But before we actually get into that, if you're excited for this video and this series, be sure to hit that like button. And if you're new here, consider subscribing because I will be putting out tech videos just like this every single week. Also, I am not sponsored by any companies I may be referencing in this video. Anyways, back to the reason why you guys are here in the first place. So when you're actually putting together a PC build, you're going to be looking at 6 major components that go into your case, and then your peripherals, which are like your monitors, and your keyboard and your mouse, or your mouse I should say. And then you also have your operating system, which is what runs everything. So you're probably familiar with like Windows 10. Those are the 9 major components that I consider when I'm actually putting together a PC, and those are the 9 parts that we're going to talk about today. For this video, I will be going through each of these parts. I'll be giving you a general explanation of what they do and what you need to know about them. I'll also tell you about how much you can expect to spend on them, like a range. It's a pretty broad range because, you know, depending on what your budget is, you can spend more or less. And then also I'll give you just a general recommendation based off of a $500 build or a just slightly less than $1,350 build. I will also be putting together a video about how to plan and budget your build, as well as a build vlog itself in this video series that I'll be producing in the next coming weeks. So if you're interested in that, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on those videos as well. Okay, so the first main part you're going to want to take a look at is your case. And it makes sense that you would want to go over your case first because your case determines what you can actually fit into it and what components you can actually have. So when you're looking at your case, make sure that you're picking a case for size. So determine that you don't really have to necessarily pick your case right now, but you want to think about the size in particular. So if you plan on having a normal size case like mine, this is a mid tower, then you know you can fit full ATX. You can fit basically every graphics card there is. You can fit a ton of hard drives and ton of SSDs and this and that. However, if you decide you want to have a smaller case, you can't fit all that. So you got to make sure you're picking components that will fit in your case. The second thing you want to look at when you're actually looking at a case is going to be the airflow. So it's really important to make sure that you have plenty of intake and exhaust spots on your case so you can put fans there, so you can make sure that all the components are nice and cool. This will make sure that they last longer and that they don't overheat and you don't have thermal throttling or anything that will cause your performance to go down. As for your case, I think you can get a really solid feature set and a really pretty good case that's a normal size, like a mid-tower, for between $40 and $80. If you're a new builder, I would definitely recommend staying between that $40 and $80. You can obviously spend more and get specialty cases. You can get a case like this, which is a really, like, it's a more so high-end. I think it retails for around $180 when I purchased it. But you really don't need to spend that much, and quite frankly, it's more for show, not really for getting into PC building in the first place. And so my recommendation is find a case that you like and it has the features you want. I mean, case is really mostly aesthetics, so what you like to see in a case is going to be different than what I like to see in a case. I will say that I do really like Phanteks. I'm kind of a Phanteks fanboy when it comes to cases. They just make really good cases that have a lot of good features, and they just go above and beyond when it comes to building cases. But I've also built in Fractal Design cases as well as Corsair, and I like those as well. But again, when I'm shopping, when I'm picking out parts, I typically try to find good prices on Phanteks cases, just because, again, I have preference to them. They just make really good cases. So the next component I want to talk about today is your CPU. This is kind of like the brain of your computer. And as of right now, there are 2 major producers of CPU. You have Intel and then you have AMD. If you look at computers, you probably are familiar with the Intel Core i-series processors that they've been producing for about 10 years now. And then you might be familiar with the Ryzen series processors from AMD that have been out about 3 years now. So those are your 2 options right now on the market. So another thing you need to know is that your CPU actually will get really, really hot. All CPUs do, and it's kind of like a lot of components you'll have in your computer itself. So what you actually need to make sure is that you have adequate cooling. Luckily for us, most CPUs that when you purchase them, they come with what's called a stock cooler. This is just a heat sink and a fan the heat sink will extract the heat from it, and then your fan helps dissipate the heat and keep your CPU cool. You can get at what's called an aftermarket cooler. There's two different types. You can get air cooling. That's like it's a bigger heat sink and has fans that again does the same exact thing as your stock cooler, except it does it a little bit better. Or you can also get what's called an all-in-one water cooler. This does basically the same exact idea, except it extracts it and puts it into water, and then that water goes to a radiator in which you have fans that are blowing through the radiator and keep that water cool. Typically, all-in-one water coolers look nicer. I like the look of water coolers in my opinion. However, they do typically cost more than a similar performing air cooler. And the last thing I want to mention about your CPU is going to be how you determine how actually fast your CPU is. And the general idea is that if you have more cores and threads, the faster your CPU will be, and then if you have higher clock speeds, your CPU, the faster your CPU will be. That's not a perfect explanation of how fast your CPU actually will perform. But again, we're not here to dive too deep into it. So if you guys are interested in a deeper dive into to determine how fast your CPU is, let me know in the comments below. And if I get enough interest, I'll make a video on that as well. So in general, when it comes to your CPU, most people are going to spend between $100 and $300 on their processor. And so my recommendation for your CPU is that if you have about $500, the Ryzen 3200G is a great option just to get into PC gaming. You can always upgrade your system later on to get better performance, but it will give you a actually on board, or an iGPU they're called, and that means your GPU is actually on the same package as your CPU, and so you won't actually have to go out and purchase a graphics card. So if you don't have a lot of money and you just want to get into PC gaming, or you just want to get into having your own PC, it'll be a great option for you. Now, if you do have a little bit more money, you could spend around $1,350 getting the Ryzen 7 3700X or the Ryzen 9 3900X. Those are great options as well. You just have to modify your budget a little bit to make sure that those could fit in there. But those are the three processors I would currently recommend, because they give you the best bang for buck and they give you a lot of performance for what you for a lot of different tasks. And moving on from your CPU, you have your motherboard. And your motherboard is kind of like the CPU counterpart. It's like your nervous system, really, for your computer. It connects everything together. And as of right now, I feel like there's three major things you have to know about it. First one's going to be the socket. The second one's going to be your chipset. And then the third is going to be your actual size, which we talked about briefly when we were going over your case. So as for your socket, the important part here is just to make sure that you get a motherboard that matches the socket of your processor. So so on current mainstream platform on AMD side, it's going to be your AM4 socket, and then on Intel, it's going to be your LGA 1151 version 2. So if you're going, if you're going with a processor on Intel side, you're going to have to get a motherboard that has the socket of LGA 1151 version 2, and then if you're going on Intel or AMD side, you're going to have to make sure that the motherboard has AM4 socket on it. So this is just the spot in the motherboard in which the processor drops in. If you don't have the proper socket, it won't work. It won't. Sometimes it won't fit, and sometimes it might fit, and it just won't work, and it'll cause issues. So the second part you're going to need to know about your motherboard is going to be your chipset. And I like to explain chipsets as kind of like the feature pack, all the features you're going to actually have on your motherboard. So depending on what you want, it's going to be depending on which chipset you actually go out and get. I will leave in the description box below a link to 2 different YouTube videos that I found very useful. So I've been doing, building PCs for a long time, but the problem is chipsets. There's so much to chipsets that it's really kind of hard to explain in this video. So I'm going to drop down, again, like I said, I'm going to put them in the description box below. So if you're interested more so in chipsets and how to pick out your motherboard based on chipset, check out those videos because they do a great job explaining what type of chipset you need. Anyways, as of right now, if you're going to go with mainstream AMD side, you're going to be looking at probably the 2 motherboard chipsets you're going to look at are going to be B450 and X570. And then if you're going for Intel side, you're going to be looking at H370 or Z390. Again, the videos will give you a better understanding of how to pick out your chipset, so I definitely recommend checking out those videos so you can get that information. And the last thing I want to touch on with your motherboard is going to be your size. And the two major ones you're probably going to look at are ATX and Mini ITX. And so if you want a normal size build, a mid tower like mine, or even a full tower, you can get yourself an ATX, which is a standard size motherboard. Most of the time, the ATX motherboards have the most features, and they're super feature packed. You might get more M.2 slots, and you get more expansion slots and all this other stuff. Typically, again, you have more features on the motherboard because it's a bigger size. And then Mini ITX is for if you want a really small case. If you want a small form factor case that a full motherboard can't actually fit in, you lose some features by you typically lose some features by going to a smaller motherboard. But again, it's smaller. You can fit it into a smaller case, and it doesn't take up as much space on your desk. There are also a couple other sizes like eATX, which is bigger than ATX, and there's Micro ATX, which is between an ITX build and a full ATX build. So again, there's a lot of different options out there, but the two main ones you're gonna have to pay attention to are ATX and ITX. And so most people are gonna spend between $100 and $300 on their motherboard. And my personal recommendation is if you're getting an 8-core or lower, so an 8-core or 6-core processor from any of the lineups from Ryzen series processors, so either 1000, 2000, or 3000 series, get a B450 motherboard. It's gonna run. You can get a really solid MSI B450 Tomahawk Max, which is you can actually use the 3000 series Ryzen's without updating your BIOS or anything, and it's gonna do perfectly fine. It'll run you about $120. Now, if you decide you absolutely need PCIe Generation 4, then you're gonna have to go with X570. But I would also recommend the X570 motherboard platform if you do want a 12-core or 16-core processor like right now. You absolutely don't need the X570 motherboard or the X570 chipset if you want to run a 12 or 16 core processor, but it'll give you the most features and it'll give you the most when it comes to if you want to overclock those processors as well. The next part we're going to talk about today is going to be your memory. And what memory is super fast, volatile storage. And what that means is that when your computer shuts off, anything that's stored in memory is gone. So it's temporary. You don't keep everything in memory. It needs power to stay in there. Now, the point of memory is that it's super fast, and it connects with your CPU, and it can communicate with your CPU really quickly. So if there's any critical data that your CPU needs stored or needs to be constantly reading, it'll store it in memory so it can quickly access it as it needs to. Unlike so that it's, instead of constantly accessing your storage drives like your hard drive or your solid state, it can just access your memory, and it makes the process a lot faster. The current standard is DDR4. DDR5 is expected to come out. I think it was actually expected to come out sometime this year, the end of this year, but I didn't see any news about DDR5 coming out. However, it probably won't be on mainstream platforms for at least a few years. It took quite a few years to get it. Everybody transitioned over to DDR4 when we switched back about five years ago. So again, DDR4 is the current standard. We'll be moving on to DDR5 in the next couple of years. But honestly, I wouldn't really be worried about DDR4 versus DDR5 because DDR4 is quite frankly it's super fast as it is right now. And when it comes down to the performance of your memory modules, the thing that you have to look at is your clock speed as well as your timings. And the general idea is the higher the clock speed and the lower the timings, the faster your memory modules will be. But again, of course, the higher the clock speed and the lower the timings, the more expensive it gets as well. And so it's not always economical to go out and buy the fastest and lowest timing kits. Ryzen really likes 3600 speed memory as long as it has decent clock speeds, and then Intel doesn't really prefer it, but getting between 3000 and 3600 is perfectly good for Intel on their side. And the last thing I want to mention when it comes to your memory modules is make sure that you're checking the QVL list on your motherboard manufacturer's website. This is a list that includes all memory modules that they've tested and confirmed that they work. Now, just because your modules that you picked out aren't on that list, it doesn't mean it won't work with your motherboard. It just means that they haven't tested it and they haven't confirmed that it works, and their timings and everything that they have rated their memory modules at. That means that they haven't confirmed that those will actually work on their motherboard. So you might have issues hitting exactly what they've claimed that they should hit. As for price, most people are going to spend between $50 and $200 on their memory modules. It's going to really depend on what how much capacity they want for them. If they want 16 gigs, or they want 32 gigs, or they want 64 gigs. And it's going to also depend on the speed and the timings of their memory modules. My recommendation would simply be getting, if you're just going to be playing games, 16 gigs at about 3200 or 3600 speed is going to be perfectly fine. You'll probably get that for about under $100. And then if you want to do video editing, basically get, again, 3200 or 3600 speeds with timings around 17, 16 if you can, and get about 32 gigs of that. And that should run you about 150, maybe a little bit more than that. So moving on from your memory, you have your video card. And as I talked about briefly earlier, you don't actually have to go out and purchase a video card if you don't want to. Instead, you can get what's called an APU, which has the graphics card actually baked on to your CPU. So it's all in one bundle when you buy your CPU. AMD calls them APUs, but they're just basically CPUs that have integrated graphics. Now, the performance of integrated graphics is not going to be as good as if you go out and purchase your own discrete graphics card, but they are substantially cheaper. As of right now, we have two major producers of GPUs, and that's going to be AMD and NVIDIA. You might be familiar with the Radeon graphics cards, and then you might be familiar with like the GTX and RTX GeForce graphics cards on NVIDIA's side. Intel is rumored to be developing their own graphics cards themselves, so that's supposed to be coming out sometime next year. So that would actually be really good for competition. And as I said before, you have discrete and you have integrated. Discrete graphics cards are more money, but typically provide more power. And then integrated are a lot cheaper because you don't actually have to buy a graphics card, but they also don't have as much power. Now, when you go out and you're going to be looking at purchasing them, most people are going to spend between $150 and $400 on their graphics card. If you're getting into this, about the $300 range, it's kind of like the sweet spot for like great performance at 1080p. Maybe even you probably actually get a card for a little bit cheaper than that can do really solid 1080p performance. It just depends on you and what your budget is in total, but most people will spend between $150 and $400. And my personal recommendation is if you're going to have about a $500 build, so if you have this really entry build that you're just getting in, don't get a graphics card. Use the integrated graphics on the 3200G. Now, if you're going to go and you have a little bit more money and you're going to go with the $1,350, just slightly under there, you can get a Radeon 5700 XT for, I think it's for under $400. So that's what I would recommend. It will give you great performance, especially for the money. Now, if you don't really want to go with the Radeon 5700 XT and you prefer to go with NVIDIA, they do also have the RTX 2070 Super, but it is like about $100 more, so be prepared to spend that for that. So the next major component we're going to talk about today is your storage, and you can have multiple storage drives. Just depends on how many slots or how many expansion slots you have on your motherboard. But as of right now, there are two major types of storage you can get. You can get a standard mechanical hard drive disk, HDD. They are cheaper per gig, but they are a lot slower. And then you can also get a SSD, which is a lot faster, but they are more expensive per gig. As for SSDs, you have two different types. You have 2.5 inch drives, so it'd be the same size as a laptop hard drive, and then you also have M.2 drives. M.2s are pretty convenient because you actually just plug them right into your motherboard, and you don't have to use any power connectors or SATA connectors to connect your solid state to your motherboard. So when it comes to price, you're going to be looking at about $40 to $60 for a 2 terabyte hard drive, so it's a mechanical hard drive. Or if you decide you want to go with a solid state drive, you're going to be spending about 50 to 60-ish, 70 maybe dollars on a 512 or 500 gig solid state drive. As you can see from that comparison, you're going to be spending about 4 times as much per gig on a solid state drive as you will on a hard drive. My personal recommendation is that you go out and get both of them. One, you'd get a 500 gig-ish, about 500 gigs solid state drive for your boot drive, so to put your operating system, all your critical programs on there, and even maybe some games that have a lot of loading in them. And then when it comes to your hard drive, go out and get a 2 terabyte hard drive for around, again, $50. And the reason why you want to get that is so you can put all your photos, your videos, your documents, your games that don't have ridiculous load times, all on that drive. If you don't have a big enough budget for both of them, I would definitely recommend just at least getting the solid state drive, and they're cheap enough now that you can get a 12 gig, 500 gig solid state drive for a pretty affordable price, and they can fit in basically every build that you would look at. And the last core component we're going to go over today is going to be your power supply. And in my opinion, it's probably the most important part out of the entire build. And there's a couple reasons why. The first one's going to be because your power supply, if you get a good one, it's probably going to last you 2, 3, maybe even 4 builds before you have to upgrade. And then number 2 is, well, if you have a shoddy one and it blows up on you, it could probably take the rest of your system with you. Luckily for me, I haven't had that issue, knock on wood, but it could happen. And I've heard of stories, and I've heard of those horror stories that it has happened. Now, when it comes to your power supply, you're looking at a couple different things. The first is your wattage, and that is capacity of power that it could output to your system. So when it comes to that, I like to look at trying to get double what you need in wattage. So if you have a system that needs 350 watts, get a 700 watt power supply. If you have a system that needs 250 watts, get a 500 watt power supply. And that's because of 2 different reasons. The first one is efficiency. So your power supply is going to be most efficient between 40 and 80% of total capacity that the power supply can put out. And number 2 is going to be all about expansion. So if you ever want to get a better graphics card that needs more power or more drives or this or that, you're going to have that power available to you in your power supply. You're not going to have to worry about it. You're not going to have to go out and buy a new power supply just because you wanted to get a better graphics card or a better CPU or whatever you decide you want to expand on your system. The next thing you want to look at when it comes to your power supply is going to be modularity. So what modularity is whether or not you can unplug the cables you don't need from your power supply. So if your power supply is fully modular, you can actually unplug all the cables from it. So if you don't need it and you don't need to plug it into one of the components, if you don't have that component, say you don't have any hard drives, and you don't need any SATA connectors, you can just unplug that cable. And that's nice because it makes it a lot easier to cable manage, makes it a lot cleaner, and if you don't have a case that has like a basement like mine, then it makes it look a lot nicer too. Now on the flip side, there's also non-modular. All the cables on a non-modular power supply are together. You can't take any apart, and no matter what you do, they're going to be attached to that power supply. So if you don't need certain cables, you're just going to have to zip tie them up and try to make them look as nice as possible. And the last thing you want to look at when you're looking at your power supply is going to be the 80+ rating. So first and foremost, if you're purchasing a power supply, never get a power supply that doesn't have an 80+ rating, because that basically is the efficiency rating. And as of right now, the scale goes 80+, 80+ bronze, 80+ silver, 80+ gold, 80+, I think it's platinum, then titanium. And basically, as you move up on that scale, your components inside the power supply will be nicer, will be better, and usually you get a higher, like a longer warranty, which is really nice. So again, me mentioning it might last you 2, 3, 4 builds. If you have a 10-year, 15-year warranty on that power supply, even if it has any issues, you can just replace it with a new one by submitting the warranty. And then you don't have any issues. And again, that's one less part you have to buy. So it's really nice to go out and purchase a power supply that's going to last you a long time and make sure that you get the most out of it. Now again, typically as you go up on that scale, you get better capacitors, you get just better quality components that are going to be in that power supply, so it will last longer, give you less chance of having any issues with other components in your system as well. Now when it comes to a new build, most people are going to typically spend between $45 and $100 to get a pretty solid quality power supply. I like EVGA, Corsair. They both make really good power supplies. Those are the main 2 companies I look at when I'm building a new PC. They just they typically have great prices, and they typically have great quality components. But in generally, there are a ton of good brands when it comes to power supplies. Just make sure you're getting 80+ bronze, and I would definitely recommend at least getting semi-modular, which is basically a power supply that has some cables that you can unplug and then some cables that you cannot. Semi is just modular, is just going to make it a lot easier to build with. It's going to make it a lot less stressful, and you're not going to have to worry about all these extra cables as well. And then of course, make sure you're getting a power supply that's about double the wattage that you will need for your system. And don't worry about calculating your wattage, because I will leave a source in the description box below that you can actually punch all your parts in. It's called PCPowerPicker.com if you're not familiar with it. You punch all your parts in, it'll tell you your estimated wattage. So you'll have all that information right there for you. And so that covers your whole build, this thing right here. Everything that goes into this, that covers all the parts for that. And so the last things that we want to talk about today are going to be your peripherals as well as your operating system. So when it comes to your peripherals, you have your monitor, your keyboard, and your mouse. I'll leave a bunch of links in the description box below to parts that I personally use, the monitors I have, as well as keyboard, mouse, different parts I've tested out. And in my opinion, I find that although it's a budget brand it's a more or less a budget brand. Biotech makes some really good monitors for the money. You can get their 1080p 144 hertz monitor. I think it's about $150. It's a VA panel, looks great. Or you can even get their 75 hertz 1080p monitor, which I have right here. I have their 144 hertz 1080p right here, and then I have their 75 hertz 1080p right here, both VA panels. This one's about $110, I think it is. I've had them for probably about 8 months now. I love them. They work really well. I haven't had any issues. Colors are okay, but again, I like them when it comes to just in general. They're really just, for the price, they're really good. Again, they also have higher models that are more expensive. You can look into that as well when you go into that. And then for keyboards, I really have been impressed with Drevo. Drevo's been a really good brand for me. I've tested out their Caliber V2, and then I personally have their Blademaster TE. Both of those keyboards, I love them. I didn't like the Caliber V2 because it was too small for me, but it was a really nice keyboard. All the clicks and everything were really good. I tried out their brown switches. I don't really know how to pronounce it. It's like this one right here is Gatoron Brown, so I can pronounce that. And the switches feel almost identical to my old Corsair keyboard that I have over there on my wife's desk. And then the Caliber V2 has I don't know how to say it. It's Adamu brown switches. Those felt pretty good too. I like the Gatoron a little bit better, but again, they both feel really good. I prefer brown, so that's what I use, but basically what color switches you use is going to be dependent on what you actually like. Again, I like these keyboards. They're really cheap. They're about $50, maybe a little bit more depending on which one you get. But they're really good quality. Software is kind of finicky though, so if you're gonna go out and purchase those, make sure you have to fidget with the software a little bit. Again, it's a little finicky. Now, when it comes to your mice, I've always purchased Logitech mice. I've had the G502 for many moons. I had it way back when, and then when the G900, this is the G900, when this one came out, I wanted to get it. I wanted to test it out because it's a wireless mouse, and I was like, man, I wonder if this is actually going to be as good as they claim it to be. And I love it. I use it, usually use it wirelessly unless I need to charge it. And then I have this, you might be able to see it. Let me see. This retractable cable that comes in and out. So if I don't, so when it's fully charged, I just retract it and it's gone. It's not there. I can use my mouse freely. I like Logitech mice myself, but there's a ton of good brands. I'll leave mine, the G502, as well as my G900 down in the description box below if you guys are interested in exactly what I have. But that's my personal preference. You can get a lot cheaper ones too. This is when I bought this was like a $150 mouse or $180, so it was like way over expensive. Way overpriced for what I should have actually paid for a mouse. But you can actually get a kit for a keyboard and a mouse if you're just trying to get in for cheap, for like $20 or so. But if you absolutely want a gaming keyboard and a gaming mouse, you can spend $100 combined and get a $50 mouse and a $50 keyboard that has great performance. It feels really good. They're mechanical keyboards and so forth. And so the last thing I want to mention is your operating system. And as of right now, Windows 10 is probably the most common operating system to actually install on a new gaming PC, but you can also go with Linux, which is free. When it comes to your operating system, there's not really much to say about it, but I'll leave a link in the description box below to a video that kind of shows you how to get cheaper Windows keys, because Windows keys can be quite expensive. So not spending all your money on a Windows key when you could put it towards another drive or a better graphics card, this or that, would definitely help benefit you guys when it comes to building your first PC. And well, guys, that covers this video. That covers everything I wanted to talk about today. Okay, so next week we'll have a video about how to budget and plan your build itself, and then we'll also have the week after that a actual build vlog, and then we'll have 2 more videos about how to install your OS and drivers, as well as how to benchmark your system so you know that you're getting the best performance possible. So if you're excited for those videos, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on that content. Now, if you like this video, please be sure to hit that like button. If you didn't like it, be sure to hit that dislike button, but be sure to let me know why in the comments below. If you have questions or concerns, or I missed anything at all, be sure to leave that in the comments as well. And until next time, guys, I will see you guys later.